Our speaker today is Dan Delaney of it's Somme, is that correct? Somme, okay, of the Somme Forest and Prairie Restoration Project. Most of you have seen it and never knew what it was. It's right next to the post office on Dundee. Yeah, you see that big empty field out there all the time, and so it seems. Well, there's a lot going on there. And Dan will tell you all about it. Prior to becoming a volunteer at Somme, Dan had two full careers, one as an advertising executive and the other in the technology field as a user experience researcher. Neither required the use of a bow or a lopper. He is now proficient in the use of both. Please welcome Dan Delaney.
Thanks, Bob. So thanks a lot for coming today. As Bob said, I'm Dan Delaney, and my route to coming to speak to you today about Somme did include a career in advertising and technology, neither of which I will focus on today. When people ask me, Dan, what are you doing these days? I say, I work in the woods. And what I'll explain that a bit in a minute, but what I've been doing has given me a really focused picture of the natural world around us, and specifically the natural world at Somme. Some of you might know that we're in the midst of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And what that is an attempt to prevent, halt, and reverse the degradation of ecosystems around the world. And this might call to mind projects in, across different continents or even on the outer edges of the US. But one is actually occurring right here in the middle of Northbrook that's been going on for 40 years. It's in Somme Forest Preserve, which includes what Bob referred to, which is the Prairie by the post office, but it also includes Somme Woods, Somme Prairie Grove, and Somme Prairie. So it's 410 acres north of Dundee Road, which is a lot. And, every week, about 3 days a week, teams of volunteers go in and do sort of our effort to help heal the planet by restoring a prairie, savanna, and forest ecosystem. In so doing, restore native trees, plants, grasses, and the different fauna that those support, from insects like beautiful butterflies to several species of birds. And what it reflects is there's many dimensions to it. And today I want to really cover the history, the mission, the discoveries and accomplishments, that have occurred there, the volunteers, what motivates them, and a little thought on Somme and the planet. Now, I used to drive by Somme all the time to visit my folks in Northbrook. And I just figured it went back like 50 yards or so, and there'd be more houses and the like. I had no idea, one, how big it was, and two, what an important part it would become in my life. I grew up in Chicago, and I really love it. But, for graduate school, little background on me. In graduate school, I spent 4 years in Colorado, and the wildness of the place never left me. I was surrounded by people who were passionate about what they would say, going into the mountains. And every Monday morning before work or school, we'd sort of get together. We'd talk about, where'd you go this weekend? What'd you do? What was it like? And that sort of passion was sort of we would talk about going into the mountains, but really was about going into an area where you could be immersed in nature. There's a famous mountaineer and naturalist named John Muir, who has a line that says, "The mountains are calling and I must go." And that was sort of the unspoken mantra of the folks I was surrounded by. And since I've been back in Chicago, I try to recapture that. I hiked and camped throughout the Midwest. I learned how to become a birder. I even learned how to windsurf. And all that was fun, but none of that recaptured that sense of being deep in nature, surrounded by kindred spirits who love doing that too. That was until a friend of mine named Fred said, Dan, quit your job. Come to Somme, volunteer with people like me. You'll love it. You know, they've got birders, they've got people who just love the outdoors, they've got backpackers, they're your people. Quit. Come on now. So I did. I did. And 2 years ago, I headed with Fred to a workday at Somme. It was during the winter, and we were there. There were about 12 other people, and we each got a bow saw, which is like sort of a rectangular saw with the serrated edge on the bottom, and loppers, which are sort of big cutters that can cut shrubs. And we headed in and worked for 3 hours. We were cutting invasive buckthorn. We were sectioning dead ash trees, and then building big bonfires under the guidance of really friendly, knowledgeable people, like Jim here in the middle, who would show you how to do it. And I was even introduced to a 300-year-old bur oak tree on the right. So after all that, I was really hooked, you know. And it's now with the spin on that Muir quote, every week I think, you know, the wild is calling, and I must go. Somme is really wild. It's much more than the prairie that's around the post office. It goes all the way back through the woods, you know, up to the metro tracks. And, you know, so what is Somme and what's so special about it? You know, Somme is part of the Cook County Forest Preserve system. And as you might know, 11% of Cook County is forest preserves. That's a lot, and that's a lot to take care of. And I'm part of a group called the Friends of the Illinois Nature Preserves group. And what we do is we help out, and we work under the guidance and auspices of the Forest Preserve group. But I work with them in Somme, but we work in several other parts of the Forest Preserve system too. And what's special about it is, you know, that the roots of our efforts go back into the late 70s, where there was a thing called the North Branch Prairie Project. And that was an attempt to identify prairies that are part of the Forest Reserve system, primarily along the North Branch. And these would be little areas, less than half of an acre, that were still prairies. You know, prairies used to be the primary sort of natural formation of Illinois, and most of it with settlement that became quite degraded. It was great that settlement brought farms and people and livelihoods and so forth, but the prairie and the ecology around it was perfect for farming. So a lot of the original prairie was just pushed out, and there were little fragments of it around, and the North Branch Prairie Project was all about trying to restore them and bring them back. Now, there's a little schematic of what the ecology is really like. Here is a description of, this is prairie in its ideal form. It's grassland. There's a couple trees, and it's, you know, basically deep, rich soil, which ended up being very great for farming. Savanna is what builds off of that. As you see, there's deep grasses, there's more trees, and it also is, you know, the same rich, rich soil beneath it. That bumps up to woodland, which is a little more in terms of canopy, you know, 39% canopy, which is trees, and then forest. And this is what we learned is the real arc of what Somme is. The prairie is still, you know, under development. It's the big sort of open area around the post office. Bumping up next to it is savanna, then, you know, light woodland, and as you get towards the metro tracks, it's deep forest. But that is Somme, you know, and I'll be referring to this whole arc as Somme. Now, what's interesting is the project that began back in the late 70s and early 80s was like, well, let's you know, help these prairies. Let's, you know, bump them out and grow them. And there wasn't much known about savannas because with settlement, they basically were obliterated. And as the work began, you know, all along this is the, you know, a quick arc of the North Branch sites that are owned by Cook County Forest Preserve. And the initial goal was to restore small degraded prairies along here. Now, these aren't all prairies. It's just the areas along the North Branch that are owned by the Forest Preserve. But the goal was to go and pick out, prairie fragments that we could bring back. They tended to be small fragments that were surrounded by thickets of buckthorn. And the thought was if we could push back, and this is early 80s, so I was there. If we could cut back and push it, they could grow out. And what was interesting was there's a lot that wasn't known of that picture that I showed you earlier of the prairies lead to savannas, lead to woodlands. And what happened was, they used to be beautiful. They used to be very lush as an ecosystem, a prairie, and savanna has its own plants, it's open, it's pretty beautiful. But as, without fire, which used to come through and keep it clear, with settlement, it became to get overgrown. And that's all of a sudden, we're left with some fragments. So what's interesting in a similar situation, same guy, John Muir, I kind of like the guy, was shown here with Teddy Roosevelt, had been pushing for bringing back the ground layer under the Sierra forests, which had also gone through a similar thing. And he described them as being once divinely beautiful, but now they're desolate. It was sort of a similar situation to what we faced with bringing back the prairies. And as I had mentioned, the prairies were basically overrun after the settlement, and there was nothing to sort of previously protect them, which was fire. Now, fire is an essential component of a lot of North American ecosystems. And, it would sweep down through the upper Midwest and basically over tens of thousands of years. And what was able to become the ecosystem were the trees and different types of plants, shrubs that had characteristics that allowed them to survive and thrive in, post fire. And fires were also, that was for tens of thousands of years, it was the way. So the fires caused by lightning would come through, and whatever had the characteristics to survive formed the sort of ecology. Native Americans for thousands of years would also set fires, in this area, and they would do that to restore, keep the grasslands, to keep things from coming in and overgrowing there. The grasslands attracted game. They would use fires to sort of thin out the forest, so it made it easier to hunt. It also sort of kept down ticks and mosquitoes. And if you had a thinner forest, you could also see if maybe hostile visitors were coming. So for the combination of lightning from Mother Nature and Indians, or Native Americans, sorry, the fire used to really shape the landscape. And once again, with settlement, the fire was suppressed. So a lot of things kind of began coming back. There would be, buckthorn was a major threat to the ecology. And buckthorn is a hedge that did not evolve with the different trees and plants and shrubs in Illinois. Buckthorn, it's called European buckthorn. It was imported, and it quickly would take over different areas because buckthorn would be something that would naturally be suppressed by fire, but it was without fire, it would take over different areas. And its characteristics are that it spreads quickly, that it grows fast, and it tends to take over areas and push out the species that were there. So it's not a good thing. Apparently it's a pretty hedge for landscaping, but it really takes over. And it competes with for water, sun, nutrients with anything else that was there. It also has chemicals which keep other types of plants from germinating. So without fire, savannas become overgrown. They get thickened and they deteriorate. I'm shifting it to talk about savannas because thinking back to that chart of prairie, savanna, woodland, that's what we were discovering that really composed Somme. And people didn't know it at the time. People didn't know that much about savannas. But but prairies and savannas can become overgrown when buckthorn comes in. And it looks sickly. There's no other plants there. It's pushed out other things. And without fire, this is what happens. The goal was to bring these small pieces of prairie that were around, surrounded by buckthorn and other types of invasive, back to what they originally were. But 100 years ago, most of Somme was farms, cornfields and pastures sort of pushed out the natural species. So it brings up the question, what are we restoring it to? Because there were no fragments, even apart from these little fragments that were pretty, surrounded by overrun and they weren't that healthy. There weren't many, pieces of this ecosystem left. So we wanted to restore it, but restoring means returning it to something. We weren't really sure what restoring it to. So this is where things get really interesting. It's a bit like a mystery story. So I've covered a lot, but want to know if there's any questions at this point before I continue.
Bob, it really doesn't work well for us to take questions now because of the Zoom audience. We have a microphone that will pass around when you're finished. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
Sounds good. Well, let me get back then to the early 1980s and what the team was doing. And what began as a prairie restoration, early 80s was the mental model at the time was like this. And think of Somme being like this. Okay, we're going to go in and we think there's a prairie and then there's woodland, which is scattered trees, and then it goes into the forests, which were there. And, this is the mental model. And then in your imaginations, everything from left up to the woodland, throwing, a lot of buckthorn, invasive trees. It's overgrown with all these different shrubs and hedge-like things, so that the team was going in and cutting that stuff away. And as they were, clearing it out, they started finding scattered oak trees, in these big thickets of buckthorn and trees. So they wanted to restore things and do it properly so that it can come back as a healthy ecosystem. But they didn't know what these areas, what to do with them. Oak trees are different. And they weren't sure, should we think of this as a prairie? Should we think of this as just part of the woodland, which would be different plants? Or is it this little known savanna? They weren't really sure. It was sort of a mystery. And the mystery slowly began to reveal itself because they started out looking to bring back prairies, but actually they realized that there was a savanna right in that middle area. And they began cutting the big brush and using a prescribed burn to clear the area. Now, prescribed burn is done under the supervision of the Forest Reserve group, and it's a structured thing. And if they're even from Northbrook, you might have seen some of them going on or seen some of the smoke from them. But it's used to, clear an area more than the folks could use with tools and the like. And then they spread prairie seed in all the spots that had been cleared. So it'd be back, what they did was this area going back here, that the prairie area right up to the woodland, they, filled in with prairie seed. And the thought would be that things bounce back after a burn. And, the burn leaves more access to the sun and it allows the plants to grow, in a healthy fashion. And what they found was that when they knew that prairie plants would grow in the savanna. They didn't know much about savannas, but they knew prairie plants would grow there. But they started seeing, wait a minute, there's other plants are growing here too. And it was coming back, or other plants, they weren't as healthy as the prairie plants. And they're wondering, what are these other things that are coming up? We want to restore this, we want to do it right, but we're not quite sure what to do. And so that the plants found in the areas between the prairie and the woodland, which I've got labeled as savanna now, they didn't know it was a savanna. They just had some hints. And it led to a big discovery and a new understanding of what really composes what's a savanna. Keep this in mind because we started thinking about a prairie and it became, wait, there's a hidden savanna right here. But the thought was, how do we find out more about it? Because there were no very few remnants left. And this is where it becomes, I think, really cool, because then we were outside to find out there weren't any areas to go to find out. We think this is savanna, but we don't know. So the answers to the questions were found in libraries and archives. This guy named Stephen Packer, who is still running the renovation, and he went and spent a lot of time in archives, libraries, and he found a key thing, which was a paper written by the Illinois state biologist at the time, a guy named Arthur Vestal, and I've got a section of his paper up in the left-hand corner. He proposed that savannas aren't prairies, they aren't woodlands, they have their own plants, they have their own ecosystem. And he said, I can't point to it because nothing's left. But he thought, I think what we might be able to do is find remnants of these plants in old cemeteries, along railroad, through railroad tracks where they go through forests, which areas that sort of simulate what the perfect natural setting for savanna is. And but that was a theory. Then what I think is really cool, Stephen found the notes of a doctor named S.B. Mead, who was an early pioneer in Illinois. And he used to do his medical rounds on horseback in the 1830s, before, major population groups moved in and began to turn things into farms and the like. So he's going through these old prairies, and he was sort of an amateur botanist. So I picture this guy on his horseback going to different farms and people, and taking care of them as a doctor. But on the way, he was sort of taking notes. He was an amateur botanist, and he would write down all the plants that he was seeing. So he was making his way across, northern and central Illinois. So this guy was writing down the names of these plants in Latin, and then he would put like a little letter after each plant to refer to, whether it was, in a prairie or on a hill or in what he called a barren. Now, in the old days, savannas were called barrens. Stephen found this guy's published notes, and it turned out there were 108 plants with a bee on them, barren. It was this, think of it as like a real Sherlock Holmes type of mystery. And it was like, whoa, like with Vestal's theory of here's where we could maybe find, remnants of these plants. And then, Mead's, notes that were published in 1846, identifying the different species, like this became the guide to basically bringing back Somme Prairie Grove. And, the next step then was to actually go into railroad, following railroad tracks that were into forests, into old country cemeteries. And they found plants that Mead had talked about back in the 1830s. They actually found them, and the seeds from the plants that they found became the source to revitalize Somme Prairie Grove, which I think is really cool. But as they continued to, there's the teams, now we're back out of the 1830s, into the 1980s. As the team was clearing their way back into the woodlands, of Somme, they started finding more of these oak trees scattered around, and they were bur oaks. And they realized that, wait a minute, there's bur oaks throughout this whole sort of bigger ecosystem. And they realized the bur oaks are the keystone system, this keystone species for this whole area. And the keystone is basically a species that holds the bigger ecosystem together. So they have, they provide shaded sun, they provided food and nutrients for the plants, the grasses, the animals, the insects, the microbes, and even aspects of the soil, of the area. And they keep holding it together, they make it healthy, but they're the core. And what happened post settlement, without fire, they needed fire to protect themselves. But in essence, when you look here, go back to that schematic, they've got these open canopies, as you can see from the picture below. So they sort of stream the sun, so it's just right. and they then provide these support underneath for the perfect conditions for a specific ecology of plants and grasses to grow. This gets kind of like very specific, but that's the ecology there. That's what you'd need to bring it back. This wasn't you wouldn't, although prairie seeds could grow there, it really had their own seeds. So this is, this is what the keystone tree did in terms of helping to control the nature of the area. And that together, with fire, and we still needed fire to sweep through to keep, trees and there are such things as invasive trees, but invasive trees, buckthorn, other types of shrubs that just come in and take over. So fire's key to that, but also then once you've got it sort of open, then it was elk and buffalo, which used to be around here, would basically keep the prairies and the savannas open. So it was sort of really interesting to try to picture, back, in the pre-settlement times of the 1830s and for thousands of years before that, this combination of fire and buffalo and elk were helping. Basically, they're like the custodians of the area and kept, the savannas healthy. But and as a result, like for perspective, before settlement, oak savannas occupied 27 to 30 million acres across the upper Midwest, from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and they also occurred in the South and the East, but that's a lot. But once, fire was suppressed, it allowed other like trees and different things to come in. And you think of like, aren't all trees good? Well, it all depends. Like basswoods and maples will come in and they will surround an area. This is actually part of Somme Woods. The dark tree in the middle is a bur oak, and all these are maples. So maples will grow everywhere, and they'll compete for sun, for water, nutrients, and they'll block out, they'll create shade that blocks out anything underneath them. So that would include like any saplings from the bur oak to, create the next generation of bur oaks. But you might say, well, I don't know, this looks pretty healthy to me. Look at all that green below. But those are all maple seedlings. There's nothing else there. It's all maple, maple, maple. Buckthorn's the same way. This picture shows what happens. And that's what we were dealing with. Without the natural custodian, basically, of fire, this is what was happening. And once again, bur oaks have this really thick bark on the outside, so they can survive these different fires and continue to thrive. And it's things like like maple trees, like basswoods, the buckthorn that I talked about. They create dense shade and they compete, for the light, the water, the nutrients, for anything else that would move in there. And this is the picture, and the one on the left is really what buckthorn can do. But in terms of what we do, which is we try to clear out the buckthorn, and we'll actually take down some of the maple trees and stuff to allow the bur oaks to thrive. We'll actually, once you cut down that loss of shade, and we'll plant some of the savanna seeds and the like. But on the right, it's the same scene after stewardship, so that you see a really healthy, vibrant ecosystem. That once you are able to, eliminate all this competition. Now, for perspective, we're not ridding Somme of all non-native plants. Black-eyed Susan is a native weed. You can see it here. Blue chicory is an alien weed that it doesn't come from around here. The blue in the picture, but both of those are good. The ecosystem is still healing, so that the weeds in this ecosystem can kind of come in and be like a bandit or a scab over a wound. So as we're trying to bring it back, as the ecosystem trying to heal, there's only been only 40 years, but it's trying to heal and come back. There's going to be lots of gaps. So weeds like this can come in and actually they're good because they don't they aren't like what we call malignants, the types of plants that come in and just take over and become like a monoculture, as we would call it. These weeds come in, they stick in the open area, they keep malignants that would tend to try to overwhelm an area, and they basically hold it in place, and it's sort of a response to the disturbance that has happened. And they help by helping the ecosystems heal. As the ecosystems get stronger, they'll come in and they'll sort of take over the area where the weeds are, and just make it bigger and have the natural plants thrive. But we're not crazy, we're not taking every non-native thing out of there. A lot of them actually play a role. And fire still remains a key to sustaining healthy native ecosystems. So here you see a professional from the Forest Preserve organization laying what we call a strip fire, which kind of does what lightning used to do, and it will create fire to help. And they're prescribed burns, we call them. It's very strategic, so they won't get out of control. But under their guidance, these burns will happen. They'll kind of burn buckthorn and maple saplings, that have been shading out savanna plants, and burning actually brings growth. It helps revitalize the soil. It stimulates the germination of seeds, and it creates sort of an open system where the woodlands can actually get more sun and have a whole healthy understory of plants and shrubs that are part of the ecology. So in the end, this shows what 40 years of work can do. This is on the right. That's the forest and woodland area from the east. As it comes in, this is shot in the center of what we call Somme Prairie Grove. This is the savanna in the middle, this rich, healthy area. And as you go to the left, towards the post office, that's the prairie, which still is, will take a lot of work. But when you use this as a perspective, this was the sort of ecology of that whole Somme area 10,000 years ago. And it was prairie, savanna, woodland, forest, and with settlement, once again, without fire, the prairie and savannas became kind of a mess. The woodlands became a bit overgrown with competitive trees, so it started killing off the keystone species. But with a lot of work, we're able to turn it into this. Now, we sort of began rescuing these areas just in time. In the eastern U.S., when Thoreau was writing about nature and all that, they've been plowing up the areas to create farms and the like for 150 years. So there weren't many fragments to bring back, but here in the Chicago region, sort of think of it as islands of nature, really were maintained and existed before even anybody knew about ecosystems, which started now as that became in the 60s. So what you see here is an old map, and all the green in the center, the green arc in the center is part of the North Branch sections, but then there's a lot of these fragments that were left, in essence, waiting for us. And we've been able, especially in Somme's part of this, and just at Somme, we've been able to bring back or maintain hundreds of plants and animal species that had been pushed away, and now they're part of this thriving ecosystem. So, what are we restoring? Let me give you a couple examples. I'll refer to my notes to give you the real specifics, but just a couple of examples. This is a prairie lily. It's one of the at-risk prairie and savanna plants. There's few prairies actually have one of them anymore, and the rarity of the species is probably due to the prevalence of deer. Deer love them. They'll eat them right down to the roots. And although the roots stay there, it's difficult when this happens year after year. Deer come back and eat them. So we'll cage them. And and that basically helps helps them survive. And we've been able to, keep them growing in a lot of parts of the prairie. And also monarchs. Monarchs, are drawn to the savanna blazing star, this beautiful purple plant. And, monarchs have been threatened in Illinois, but efforts like ours have raised their status to a more hopeful category of formerly threatened. But at times we'll see dozens of monarchs around, the severe savanna blazing star. So it's become a safe haven for monarchs, and they're on the way back. Over the last few years, we've seen a pair of kestrel falcons in the northwest section of Somme, and it's the smallest falcon, and it's kind of really breathtaking to see one. What they do is they'll just hover, like really hover, and then they'll drop like a stone when they see a grasshopper or a mouse or something else as their prey. It's pretty amazing, and we've been seeing this pair for about 3 years, which is pretty cool. We've also, in the last 3 seasons, across all the 3 Somme regions that it shows you, have been seeing nesting woodcocks. And here you'll see 3 chicks that in about 2 weeks will fledge. That means learn how to fly. But we're starting to see them there too. And a lot of bird species have returned to Somme. What's been described to me, when Somme was overgrown with all these maples, all this buckthorn, it was dark. And the analogy was, birds like certain open areas, open grasslands, especially even in the woodlands. They expected to be open, and it got so dark that it was like going down a dark alley in the city. You would not go there, and the birds wouldn't go there either. But now we're seeing, many species coming back. Another species is the prairie white fringed orchid. There's a cool story behind this. It's sort of about a threatened species that's coming back from the brink of extinction. And without the help of us to kind of counter the degraded environment, these species will die out. And what's interesting on this one is there was a person in the Schiller Woods found one. He was one of the different people who help out the Forest Reserve as a volunteer, and he found one, which they're quite rare. And he got in touch with Stephen, the chief steward at Somme, and we went and got harvest some seeds from it. So they'll drop the seeds to try to repopulate in the area, but there's still a lot of seeds you can get. And we got the seeds, we took them to Somme, planted them, and over 30 years of care and study and experimentation, we've been able to bring them back. And it's gone from maybe a handful of them to now we have hundreds of them. And this is a species that almost was extinct, which is pretty cool, because a big part of what we're doing is keeping species from extinction. Now, Somme has actually become sort of a role model for efforts around the country, like the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative. Now, the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative, or SGI, is dedicated to the rebuilding of lost grasslands of the South. And people hear about Somme. There's a lot written about it. We've written papers about it. And the fellow named Dwayne Estes, who is the executive director of the SGI, actually traveled to Somme to meet with our chief steward, Stephen Packard, to talk about the strategy and the methods we are using to bring back Somme. And that included like a hike through Somme Prairie Grove. And this really influenced his strategic plan. And in the black box, I've actually pulled comments, sections from the plan. And he said, like, the key thing was bring Chicago-style conservation to the South. And he said, efforts in the greater Chicago area prove that great grassland restoration can happen both in rural areas and in the heart of the nation's largest cities. The SGI plans to follow the Chicago plan in dozens of communities across our 23-state region. So that earlier map, it's 23 states, and they're doing what we're doing. They said, this works, we're going to apply it. And later on in that same document, I'll just read his quote. He said, while it's true that more than 99% of the region's original prairies have been eliminated, that didn't stop Stephen and his friends. This was prairie grown, Somme Prairie, as they were hiking through it. I felt as though I had stepped into the Garden of Eden. I couldn't believe what I was seeing had been almost totally rebuilt with seeds from more than 450 species. So we're doing something cool here, but it's also, having an effect, in other places too. People are going to school on our success and what we've done. Now, this is very fulfilling work. We probably have, 40, maybe up to 50 volunteers that will work at, I'm calling Somme, all those 3 areas, will work in work teams of maybe 10 to 12 on a given day. Here, this is a picture from last week, and it's a lot more than that. But it was before the terrible weather came in, and it was a big group. But what's the motivation? Why do we work there? I thought the best way to share this with you would be to get some quotes from some of my colleagues. One of the first big reasons is the mission. And a friend named Steve described it as, when we're in areas like Somme Prairie Grove, I often hear, this used to all be buckthorn. It awes me that this used to be so degraded and now is so hugely beautiful. It sends shivers down my spine, the feeling that we've really made an improvement. And I took this picture at the end of a workday. This was the team I was with. And we're heading across a prairie grove, and this is one of the big bur oaks that was in the center of it. So this is a good example. All this kind of rich grassland and plants. This is early in the spring, but are surrounding the keystone bur oak. Another reason is community, and another friend named Russ put it in this way: you work with people from all different walks of life, from everywhere. People you wouldn't normally run into, different age groups, different religions and races. I like the broad range of people. You can sit and talk to a high school kid like normal. When can you ever do that? And this is a picture of another colleague named Estelle with a bow saw. And this is Caitlin, who is a student from Jones Prep in the city, cutting a piece of part of a downed ash tree. And finally, action. This is from Josh, another person from Jones Prep. Josh is actually the one on the far left here. And there's a group of Jones Prep folks that come all the time. I've been concerned about the environment. It seems so big, like the problems with the environment. Like I can vote about it, but I couldn't do much other than put my faith in the institutions to fix it. I'm here because I know my labor is going to restore an ecosystem. And that's something that I really care about deeply. So that's really, the things we're doing are having an effect. And I think if I had to wrap it up in my words, I think, all of myself and all my colleagues kind of feel like we're working to maintain biodiversity through building a healthy ecosystem. Biodiversity is really the key to maintaining the stability of the world's ecosystems, and healthy ecosystems are more resistant to challenging environmental situations. Restoring them provides the trees, plants, animals, genes, bacteria, even insects that can reanimate and revivify the earth. So that's my story. And how about you? Or if any of you are interested, Somme's just about 5 miles from here, just 5 miles down the road, and there's a bow saw and a seed bag waiting for you. Just check out the next workday or workdays at our locations, at our website. So, please, any questions?
Bill, Bob, thank you so much. Arnie's going to walk around with a microphone for the auditorium, and then we'll take questions from Zoom after that.
Hi, I'm Inga Rothschild, and for many years I've been driving west on Dundee and watching that area. It's been interesting to see where you park.
If almost at Waukegan is the opening to Somme
Where those big bricks are?
There's a big red sign right before the stoplight at Waukegan, and you can pull in there, and there's actually a lot of parking.
So, but the prairie, there's a path where you can walk.
Yeah, there's path, there's some maps. That's the forest part of it. But the map can show you, you can park there, cross Waukegan, and that gets into the Prairie Grove, some of the pictures that I was just showing.
So you're talking about parking
east of Waukegan.
East of Waukegan.
In Somme Woods, then cross it, park there. There's a parking lot just as you pull up. There's a little path that leads to Waukegan, cross the road at the light, and there's another path that starts up, and that gets into more of the savanna, which is wider open. And
Bob, there's a question in chat related to that, and that is there access to it in a way that there might be trails? In other words, how do some of us get to visit this area, or would that be a problem because we shouldn't be visiting it?
Well, that you should, and in fact, there's if you park, just where I was saying at Somme Woods, right, just east of Waukegan, there's maps there that show you where the different paths are, and it also shows how to get to the website where you can print out maps that show maps through them.
Tamara Rosenblum, I appreciate all this information because it really explains what's been happening there. But what about the trees? When they cut down thousands and thousands of trees, I could have cried. It was just so horrible seeing all those logs without the leaves and without the beauty of the place. Mm-hmm. And what about the trees helping us breathe and the oxygen that we no longer have?
Mm-hmm. That's such a good point. And trees are good, but prairies and savanna and other ecosystems are good too. And I would think it's the prairie area that was sort of leveled around the post office. There's two things going on there. One was that was a prairie, and there's remnants right in the middle of it. They're 1,000 years old in terms of the plants. It's incredible. And we could have done it slower, but it would have been more expensive. So the state came in and took it all down, and that will at one point be all prairie. It's sort of counterintuitive to think like we're going to take down trees, to replace them with prairies, but prairies also suck in carbon dioxide too. And we're taking down some trees, in the like the maples that are surrounding the oak trees also. And part of it is to open it up to allow the understory to grow, which also takes in carbon dioxide. And as I was trying to say at the end, biodiverse ecosystems are really important for the overall health of the planet. And rather than let species die or die off, part of this is bringing them back. So, and there's also an element of, there's a circularity to different ecosystems, like trees, take in carbon dioxide, but when they die, and with overcrowded forests like we have, you'll see a lot of dead trees. They're releasing the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, in terms of their cycle of life. The prairies, suck in carbon dioxide, and actually they've got deep roots and hold it deeply in there. So,
do you think they'll ever do anything with Hibbard Road, the forest between the expressway and Hibbard Road? They're doing that big trench for keeping the area from flooding in the houses. But after they're done, do you think they're going to do something nice there?
I don't know that area. I'm very focused on Somme. I know that the Forest Preserve is actually, they've got a 10-year plan in terms of restoring different ecosystems, within the Forest Preserve areas around here. So I would not be surprised if there's a plan. I just don't know what it is.
Okay. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
Debbie DePalma.
Hey, Debbie.
You could tell from your pictures and the quotes that this is obviously intergenerational work going on. But for people in the audience and in the senior center, are there ways that people can get involved in this work without necessarily using saws and traipsing into the woods when it's, 10 degrees? I know you guys go out on under all conditions, but are there other things that people can do to support this restoration work?
We're getting into the period where the cutting and the burning and the like happens during the winter. And as we get into the late spring and summer, there's a whole other effort called harvesting seeds. And it does get hot, but there's a period in the spring and early summer where it's not horribly hot. And if you dress properly, it's cool. And the stewards of the different work teams, you go in and you go like some of the beautiful plants that I had close-ups with, you'll harvest seeds from it. And they know the seeds have dropped, so the area is okay, but there's still a lot of seeds that'll just go to waste. And you actually bring craft paper bags from the Myers or whatever, and you go in with your hand, and there's ways where you just prune the seeds off and put them in there. There's things I almost included here where we have hundreds of bags of seeds by the end of the year, and then different folks that are part of the team who really know a lot about seeds, and they've studied what seed mixtures work. So you combine different seeds that kind of help each other, and then at the kind of throughout the year, interestingly, we'll reseed areas that we've cleared. So you walk around and you drop seed and the like. So that whole aspect of the seeds, is really kind of cool. And you get in there and you learn a lot, and you're with a bunch of people, and it's beautiful. You're in like Somme Prairie Grove, like that picture I showed you is the end stake, and it's the result of all of our work. It's very nice. And it gets hot, but as the season goes on, but there's something there. It's really fun.
Dan, we have a question here.
Yeah.
Yeah, 40 to 50 years ago, I used to take a long walk once a week at least. We lived just a few blocks from so many woods.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't always follow the path. I walked through those woods, and they were wilder than today.
Mm-hmm.
And I encountered a lot of people living in those woods, and they created some kind of a shelter, and you could tell that it was a hobo or someone. And with all of these immigrants coming in, it concerns me because there's so many forest areas throughout the whole Chicago area.
Well, that's not the situation at Somme. We're in there like all the time, and we're covering the whole area. So that's not happening. I know, like in Schiller Woods, folks that have been working there will come upon, those type of situations. But I don't know the master plan of how to deal with that, but it's not in Somme.
Hi, I'm Carol Konvalinka, and I actually live across from Somme. Across from Dundee. And I wanted to tell people, that there are jobs that don't require hiking in the woods, that the seed processing is a fairly sedentary job. I've heard that if people like to sharpen saws and equipment, there's that.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of opportunities. I know that it's a little daunting to get out there and just walk around. There's also an app when you enter the path, at least the one from the end of the the parking lot, and you can see what you're coming upon. Each season it's changed and explains what you see. But I really would encourage people maybe to go for their first time with a group hike. Maybe even the North Shore Senior Center would like to, arrange a walk and, to get familiar with it and see for yourself. So, it's really beautiful.
Pat Young.
Thank you.
If there's a path from the post office, it's not immediately obvious. We can't figure out where it is. Can you walk in from the post office side and walk through the Somme Prairie?
The area around the post office is still under construction in a way. There's a lot of work being done there, so there's not as much to see.
But is there a path at all?
Here. There's a path along on the eastern side of it.
Not from the post office side.
You have to park there.
First of all, congratulations on an extraordinary presentation in the area where I live near it. Two things. One, there's an abandoned golf course adjacent to this. Any chance that could be folded into the prairie?
I know it's been discussed, but not much has come of it. So I don't know much about that.
It's been abandoned now for about 4 or 5 years. It's a really beautiful area.
Yeah.
Number two, yesterday, for the first time, I noticed when I came home about 3 o'clock, if I saw one, I saw 10 to 15 monarch butterflies on the Pachysandra.
Mhm.
And they're extremely small, so they're northbound, I would assume.
I don't know much about their
It's
migration
extraordinary.
patterns, but that's great to know. Something's going on.
And then we're gonna go to Zoom. And I have a quick question. Do you have any kind of a working relationship with the Chicago Botanic Gardens?
We don't, but we're sort of a feeder for people who work there. So in terms of, a lot of people would like to work at the Botanic Gardens, and after years of being a steward with us, it's kind of good for your resume. And so some of our alumni have gone on to work at Botanic Gardens.
Dan, we have some Zoom questions. One from Barry Goldberg. Driving down Harms Road north to Lake, it seems to me that the wooded areas, including a lot of dead trees, are being cleaned out of these dead materials. Are these areas being cleaned out and or be restored by the Forest Preserve?
Yes.
Okay, short answer is yes, Barry. I have a personal question. Is there any ponds in there and any fishing? You do anything with that? Is there any thoughts to do anything with that?
There are ponds. They're actually seasonal that will sort of come back, after the winter and so forth, but not deep enough to fish. Got a lot of frogs, but.
Well, that gets to my second question. Can you tell us about some of the critters that we might not see? I mean, are there deer that go in there?
Oh gosh, there are deer.
What else?
Deer, coyotes, the different birds that I described. There's lots of snakes, and lots of different insects. But the primary ones are different kinds of birds, like the coyotes and deer.
Okay. I've got a lot of questions, but I'll keep it to a couple more.
All right.
If we saw flowers there, would it be crazy for us to pick them because we shouldn't, or would we be helping you out, or should we become a volunteer and figure that out?
Become a volunteer. In fact, as you walk in, you'll see you can come in and look, but you can't take anything out of any forest preserve.
Okay, so that's normal for any forest preserve.
Yeah.
We really should leave what we see there,
Yeah.
there, even if it looks nasty. I mean, we wouldn't want to, kind of take something that looks like a flower, but even.
No, in fact, it's often hard to tell like what's good and what's bad.
Right.
But also just in terms of keeping it simple, the forest preserve system basically says, look, you can touch, but don't take anything out of here.
Right. Last question. Is it finished so we should look upon it now as a work in progress that's never going to end? Or is there some big major parts of it that you still are working on?
As we say among the teams, we have job continuity here. It's never going to end, primarily because we're part of the ecosystem now. Civilization came, and a lot of natural factors that I tried to identify that kept this ecosystem in check are gone. So we're sort of part of it. And I think what's interesting is there's people who are sons and grandchildren of people who were doing this 40 years ago are in it. And I've got a grandson and I can picture him working on it too, but it becomes part of it. We're sort of gardeners of Mother Nature, right, in a way. Because, so that we can coexist.
Your keepers are the key. We appreciate that.
Something like that.
That's a wonderful, I think that's it. We'll turn it over to Bob.
Cool.